Okay, June 26th, 2026. Trump is standing in the Palace of Versailles. He signs a piece of paper. The stock market explodes upward. Oil prices crash. Every major news channel in the world runs the same headline. Peace deal. Iran, done. CNN calls it a triumph of American diplomacy. Fox News calls it a dangerous capitulation. Tehran calls it a victory for resistance. And you know what? None of them are completely wrong. But all of them are asking the wrong question. Because here is what nobody, and I mean nobody, is asking right now. In the exact same 24-hour window, while Washington and Tehran were busy smiling for the cameras, while analysts were arguing about whether Trump won or lost, while the entire global media was locked onto a palace in France, Iran made one move, one quiet, technical, almost invisible move. And that move didn't just crack the foundation of the agreement Trump just signed, it handed China something worth more than the entire deal itself. And today I'm going to show you exactly what that move was, why the American negotiating team either didn't see it or chose not to see it, and why the country that benefits the most from Iran's hidden play is not Iran, not Russia, not Israel, it's China. Okay, let's get into it. To understand what Iran actually did, you need to understand one thing about how nuclear agreements work in practice. When you sign a nuclear deal, the words in the document are almost secondary. What actually matters is the verification mechanism, the referee, the person who stands in the room and says, yes, they're complying, or no, they're not. In this agreement, the Islamabad MOU, that referee is the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. Now, here's the thing. Iran has publicly, formally, on the record, stated that it does not consider the IAEA to be a neutral arbitrator. This is not a secret. This is not speculation. Iranian officials have said this explicitly for years. The IAEA relationship with Iran has been strained since 2019, when Iran began restricting inspector access. And it got worse after the agency's 2022 report citing unexplained uranium traces at undeclared sites. So what did Iran do the moment the MOU was signed? They agreed to dilute their highly enriched uranium on site, inside Iran, under their own conditions at facilities they control, with terms that give them the right to pre-approve inspector requests. That is not compliance. That is the architecture of a controlled delay. Ray Taki, senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, one of America's most respected Iran analysts, said on the record that if Iran maintains its position on IAEA neutrality, and I'm paraphrasing here to be accurate, any nuclear agreement simply cannot be adequately verified. And here's what makes this move so surgical. Iran didn't reject the deal. They signed it. They smiled. They said the right words. But they built a technical escape hatch directly into the compliance structure. Because when verification fails, and it will fail, Iran can say, we were always willing to comply. The problem was the referee. We told you from day one we didn't trust the IAEA. That's not our fault, that's your fault for not negotiating a referee we could accept. That is a masterclass in legal and diplomatic positioning. You create the conditions for failure before the agreement even begins, and you make the other side responsible for those conditions. Okay, but here is where it gets more interesting. Now I want to ask you something. If Iran's verification trap makes the deal collapse in 60 days, and multiple analysts, including Trump's own CIA director, John Ratcliffe, have expressed serious doubts about Iranian compliance, then who benefits from that collapse? The obvious answer is Iran. They avoid real verification, buy time, protect the nuclear program, and make America look like it failed again. But that's the surface answer. The real answer is more interesting. And to understand it, you need to understand a concept I call the verification vacuum. A verification vacuum is what happens when an agreement exists on paper but cannot be enforced in reality. It creates a zone of ambiguity, a window. And in geopolitics, windows are not empty. They get filled fast. The moment the MOU was signed, with its broken verification architecture, three things happened simultaneously that almost no one connected to each other. First, oil markets stabilized. The Strait of Hormuz reopened, capital flows resumed. Second, American political attention shifted immediately to domestic politics, the stock market, midterm messaging, inflation numbers. Washington entered what I call a management posture, dealing with consequences rather than executing strategy. Third, China held the Lujiazui Forum in Shanghai, and at that forum, the governor of the People's Bank of China made announcements about yuan internationalization, offshore RMB trading, and anti-sanctions legal infrastructure that in any other week would have been the top story in every financial publication in the world. But nobody was looking at Shanghai. Everyone was looking at Versailles. And that is exactly what China needed. Okay, I want to be very precise here because this is the part that matters most. China made 3 moves in the same 24-hour window, and each one was timed to land while the world's attention was pointed somewhere else. Move 1. They published the architectural blueprint for the next world order. On June 17th, China released the Global Governance Initiative white paper, the GGI. Now, China has been talking about multipolar governance for years. That's nothing new. But what's new is this. The document was supported on launch day by close to 160 countries. That's nearly double the membership of NATO. And on the same day, China announced 3 new international organizations: the World AI Cooperation Organization in Shanghai, the World Data Organization in Beijing, the International Mediation Organization in Hong Kong. AI, data, international dispute resolution. Those are the 3 pillars of geopolitical power in the 21st century. Whoever controls artificial intelligence infrastructure, whoever sets the rules of data governance, whoever mediates international disputes, that is who runs the world in 2040. China planted its flag in all 3. On the same day, Trump signed a deal at Versailles. That is not coincidence. That is calendar strategy. Move 2. They started dismantling the dollar's infrastructure quietly. At the Lucia Zui Forum, the People's Bank of China announced that foreign central banks can now borrow Chinese liquidity using Chinese government bonds as collateral. Direct RMB financing, no dollar intermediary required. 6 of China's largest banks received authorization to trade offshore RMB foreign exchange from within the Shanghai Free Trade Zone. And Vice Premier He Lifeng announced legal anti-sanctions measures, essentially making certain forms of American financial pressure illegal under Chinese law and backing that up with enforcement mechanisms. What does that add up to? China is not just talking about alternatives to the dollar system. They are building the legal, institutional, and financial plumbing for a parallel system, brick by brick, while nobody is watching. Move 3. They let the data do the talking on science. On June 17th, the Nature Index, the world's most credible ranking of scientific research output, released data showing China has overtaken the United States in chemistry, now accounting for 53% of global output. Chemistry, physical sciences, applied sciences, biopharma. At the same time, the US Federal Reserve under Kevin Walsh held rates at 3.5 to 3.75%, higher for longer, which means the cost of capital for American businesses stays elevated, R&D budgets shrink, scientific competitiveness weakens. China advances, America manages. In one 24-hour window, the governance architecture for the next century, the financial infrastructure to bypass American pressure, and a scientific dominance that compounds year over year. No bullets, no documents, no diplomat in Switzerland, just 3 quiet moves while the other players were staring at each other. Now I want to talk about what comes next, because I think the MOU is not an endpoint. I think it's a phase. Here is the structure of the trap as I see it. The agreement gives Iran 60 days to demonstrate compliance with nuclear commitments verified by an agency Iran has already said it doesn't trust. Trump himself said at the G7, and I'm paraphrasing directly from the record, if they don't come through, it'll probably mean we bomb them. His own words. On the same day he signed the deal. US officials told reporters that if Iran is seen as stalling, the US will, and again I'm paraphrasing the documented quotes, very quickly pull the plug and go back to maximum pressure. So the architecture of the deal looks like this. You build in a verification mechanism the other side has already rejected, attach a 60-day deadline, add a bomb threat, and have your own intelligence director publicly express doubt that compliance will happen. That is not a peace deal. That is a stage reset. It buys time, reopens the strait, stops the oil shock, gives Trump a domestic political win before the compliance clock runs out. But after 60 days, when Iran fails to satisfy verification demands it was structurally never going to satisfy, America has a clean, internationally legitimate basis to declare violation and move to the next phase. And here is my argument: the next phase does not look like bombs, because bombs have already been proven too expensive and too slow to achieve the real objective. The next phase looks quieter. It looks like reconstruction money, like NGOs, like civil society programs, like the exact same playbook America used in Bangladesh in 2024. Now, I want to stillman the counter-argument before I continue because you deserve to hear it. The counter-argument is Iran is not Bangladesh. Iran has nuclear infrastructure, a 45-year ideological state, the IRGC, and a China-Russia security umbrella. Soft power does not work on a country like that. Bangladesh fell because it was vulnerable. Iran is not vulnerable in the same way. That argument is strong. I take it seriously. But here's what it cannot account for. Bangladesh also had India standing behind it, a much larger neighbor with deep political and economic ties. India did not want to lose Bangladesh. And Bangladesh still fell, not from outside, but from within. External protection is not an absolute shield when the strategy targets domestic fractures rather than external borders. And Iran has fractures, real ones. The women's rights movement of 2025 to 2026, Kurdish minority tensions in the north, urban youth under economic collapse from the blockade, the deep political split between reformists like President Pezeshkian, who won the deal, and hardliners in the Majlis, who publicly called the MOU rushed, weak, and a betrayal of the supreme leader's red lines. A government that signed a deal half its own political establishment hates is a government sitting on a fault line. And fault lines are not defended with aircraft carriers. They're pushed on with money, media, and movements. I'm not saying this will succeed. I'm saying the infrastructure for attempting it is already being calibrated. I'm not going to give you vague predictions. Here are 3 specific, concrete things to monitor. Come back in 60 days and tell me if I was right. Watch number 1. Pay attention to whether Iran allows IAEA inspectors in late Ray, and specifically under what conditions. If Iran imposes restrictions on which sites can be visited, requires advance notice, limits sample collection, watch how Washington responds. If the US frames those restrictions as a treaty violation, that is the trap closing. Read IAEA statements directly. Do not rely on US government summaries. They will say different things. Watch number 2. Watch for NGO registration and activity inside Iran. Specifically, any USAID affiliated, NED affiliated, or IRI affiliated organizations requesting operating permits or establishing partnerships with Iranian civil society groups. They will call it humanitarian assistance, they will call it reconstruction support. But if you've seen how the soft power architecture works in Bangladesh, you know what the infrastructure looks like before it activates. Watch number 3. Watch China. Specifically, watch how many additional countries formally endorse or join the GGI in the next 60 days. If China expands its coalition while America is absorbed in the Iran compliance cycle, that is the clearest confirmation that the outside benefactor strategy is producing exactly the results Beijing planned for. June 17th and 18th, 2026, 24 hours. Iran signed a verification deal it cannot fulfill with a referee it doesn't trust under a 60-day deadline with a bomb threat attached. The fractures inside the Iranian state, the reformists, the hardliners, the IRGC, the youth movement, are now exposed to exactly the kind of external pressure that doesn't leave fingerprints. China, in the same window, launched the governance architecture for the next world order, began dismantling the dollar's structural dominance, forced a $30 billion tariff concession from an economically pressured America, and overtook the United States in scientific output across multiple fields. One country walked away from those 24 hours having won without fighting. One agreement was designed to fail so that a different, quieter operation could begin. And one historical blueprint, tested in 2024, proven effective, is being prepared for reuse on a much larger, much more strategically significant stage. The question is not whether Iran will be rebuilt. The question is who will be governing Iran when that rebuilding is finished. Think about that, and I'll see you in the next one.